The Astronomican had burned for 10,000 years. Not like a beacon burns, clean and purposeful, a lighthouse guiding sailors home. It burned the way a man burns when he has been chained to a pyre and left there across millennia, in constant, screaming agony, consuming itself to produce its light, wringing illumination from an act of endless suffering. Every astropath who touched its signal felt the echo of that torment. Every navigator who steered by its glow did so knowing the fuel behind it was a god being slowly devoured by his own throne. The Imperium of man navigated the stars on the back of a dying emperor's pain. This was accepted. This was doctrine. This was the price. And then, for 7 seconds, the Astronomican went out. Segmentum Solar reacted first. 300 astropaths stationed in the Telepathica choir fell from their meditation cradles simultaneously, hands pressed to their temples, voices rising in a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a word, but somehow both. Adepts monitoring the Vox banks heard it ripple outward, from the choir to the listening stations, to the orbital arrays, to the furthest relay shrines along the pilgrim routes. A single utterance passing mouth to mouth across half the sector like fire along a trail of promethium. Morning. Not morning as in dawn. Not morning as in the hour before the sun. Something older. Something that carried with it the memory of a light that existed before light had a name. In the chamber of the Astronomican, deep within the palace of the Emperor on holy Terra, the choir fell silent. The psychic resonance that normally filled that vast space, a continuous, bone-deep vibration that the adepts of the Astra Telepathica learn to tune out the way one learns to tune out a distant bell, simply stopped. And 7 seconds of silence so complete that veterans of 30 years' service heard their own heartbeats for the first time. Then the Astronomican returned. But something was different. 30 kilometers away, in the outermost approaches to the Sanctum Imperialis, Captain General Trajan Valoris felt it in his bones before any instrument confirmed it. He had served at the foot of the Golden Throne his entire life. He knew its pulse the way a sailor knows the rhythm of the ocean beneath his ship. And what he felt now was not the familiar, agonized stutter of a machine grinding on borrowed time. What he felt was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone else walks into a room. All gates sealed, he said quietly, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had seen 10,000 years of Imperium history preserved in the blood oaths of his order, and was, for the first time, genuinely uncertain what he was preserving it against. All squads to the inner sanctum, Terminator squads to the throne room approaches. Nobody enters. Nobody leaves. Beside him, Shield Captain Aniron raised the question that none of them wanted to voice. Lord Commander, our augurs show no breach, no warp signature, no teleportation bloom. Whatever entered the sanctum did not use any door we understand, Valoris finished. He was already walking. The corridors of the inner Sanctum Imperialis were the most heavily defended in the known galaxy. These gold-plated bulkheads 3 meters thick, sealed with mechanisms that required simultaneous activation by 7 separate custodians. Wards burned into the architecture by the Emperor himself, active for 10,000 years, layered over by 10,000 years of subsequent reinforcement by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Grey Knights, and every order of mystical defense the Imperium had ever developed. No daemon could walk these halls. No Chaos champion had ever come within 50 kilometers of the inner throne room and lived. The augur returns showed nothing. The psychic ward sensors showed nothing. And yet when Valoris reached the outermost antechamber of the throne room, the chamber of wounds, where the bodies of custodians who had died in service were interred in the walls, the great Baroque doors at the far end stood open, not broken, not blasted apart by some demonic siege. Open, gently, as though someone had simply pushed them. He stepped through. The throne room of the Emperor of Mankind was a vast cathedral space, its ceiling lost in shadow 300 meters above, its walls lined with the gold-plated effigies of saints and primarchs and heroes who had given their lives for the species. At its center, on the dais that had not been approached without ceremony in 10,000 years, sat the golden throne, that monstrous fusion of ancient technology and psychic architecture, studded with life support mechanisms and soul-binding instruments, crackling with barely contained warp light. And seated upon it, not plugged into it, not consumed by it, but seated upon it the way a man sits in a chair, was something that Valoris had no category for. He was tall. He was luminous, not with the warp light of a psyker or the bioluminescence of alien physiology, but with something that seemed to come from before. Light had learned to travel in waves, as though light itself, when it first came into being, had briefly taken this shape, and some trace of that moment still clung to him. He was not looking at the machines. He was not feeding them or struggling against them. He sat with his hands resting on the throne's arms, his expression calm and precise and very, very old, and he was looking at the Emperor. Not at the Emperor's throne, not at the Emperor's instruments, at the Emperor's face, with what appeared impossibly to be recognition. The Astronomican burned steadily above Terra. For the first time in recorded history, it did not hurt to look at. If you've been waiting for a Warhammer 40k story that challenges everything you thought you knew about the Golden Throne, smash that subscribe button and join the crusade. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the dark millennium. Valoris had faced demons of the warp that wore the faces of saints. He had stood unmoved before bloodthirsters that shook the ground with each stride, before Lord Discordance wreathed in warp fire, before entities so ancient that the Imperium had not yet existed when they first drew breath in the Imperium. He had fought all of them. He had killed most of them. He had never once felt what he felt now, standing in the doorway of the throne room with his guardian spear leveled at a being seated calmly on the most sacred object in human history. It was not fear. Valoris had burned fear out of himself in his first century of service. What he felt was something more precise and more disturbing than fear. The recognition that the instrument in his hands, gene-forged, artificer-crafted, anointed with the psychic blessings of the Grey Knights and the structural prayers of the Mechanicus, was a fundamentally inadequate tool for this situation. Not because the being before him was more powerful than anything he had faced, but because power was not the operative variable here. The being on the throne was not threatening. That was the problem. Every hostile entity Valoris had ever encountered carried something with it. A psychic pressure, a warp taint that set the wards burning and the soul wards screaming, an aura of wrongness that every human nervous system was designed on a deep biological level to recoil from. The custodians felt none of that now. The wards were silent. The sanctified oil in the wall shrines burned without flickering. The 12 Grey Knight Terminators, who had materialized in the room's upper galleries via emergency teleportation, weapons raised, Nemesis Force halberds crackling with silver light, had gone very, very still. Brother Captain Aldrich of the Grey Knights lowered his halberd by precisely 3 degrees, not standing down, reassessing. "It is not warp-born," he said, and his voice carried the particular flatness of a man who had just had every professional assumption inverted. "I am reaching into the Imperium. I can find no thread connecting it to the warp, no demonic essence, no taint of any of the 4. "Then what is it?" asked Shield Captain Aniron, who had come in behind Valoris and stood now at his right shoulder. The answer came from the throne. "A fair question." The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the quality of something that had spoken in empty spaces before sound existed and had never quite lost the habit of filling them completely. "You may lower your weapons. I have no interest in this room's destruction. I have significant interest in a conversation, if you're willing." Valoris did not lower his spear. "What are you?" The being on the throne turned its attention from the Emperor's face to Valoris, and the Captain General experienced the singular sensation of being regarded by something that was genuinely, non-threateningly curious about him, the way a scholar who has spent centuries studying a civilization might look at one of its citizens, not as a threat, not as an obstacle, as a data point in a question it had been considering for a very long time. "I have had many names," it said. "The one I was given first was Samael. The one I chose for myself, later, was Lucifer, the morning star, the light bringer. I suspect none of those mean anything to you in this context, which is fine. Names are less important than the reason I'm here." "And why are you here?" Valoris asked. Lucifer looked back at the Emperor. Something moved in his expression. Not pity, exactly. Something older than pity and more precise. The recognition of a specific kind of wound. "Because he called out," Lucifer said simply. "Not deliberately, not with intent, but across every dimension of metaphysical reality. Across the boundaries between what you might call the warp and what I might call older spaces, there is a sound. It has been going on for 10,000 years. It is the sound of a mind of extraordinary power and clarity being slowly crushed under an unbearable weight it was never designed to carry alone." He paused. "That sound carries. I followed it here." The room was silent except for the deep mechanical breathing of the throne's life support systems. "You came because you heard the Emperor's suffering," Valoris said, and the words felt strange in his mouth, profane and logical at the same time. "I came because I recognized it," Lucifer said. "The particular quality of a sovereign intelligence that chose sacrifice and discovered, too late, that the sacrifice was not finite, that it would never be enough, that every soul fed to the machine only delayed the inevitable." He turned back to Valoris fully. "I did not cross dimensions to threaten your Imperium, Captain General. I have no interest in conquest. I have no interest in your religious disputes or your territorial wars. I came because the being in this throne is the loudest and most sustained expression of a particular kind of pain that I have ever encountered, and I have encountered a great deal of pain." "And so you simply sat down," Aniran said, incredulous. "On the golden throne." "I approached slowly," Lucifer said, with something that might have been the ghost of wry acknowledgement. "Your wards are impressive, most of them. The 43rd layer nearly worked on me. I appreciated the craftsmanship." "You bypassed the wards of the Emperor himself," Aldrich said from the gallery above. "The wards were designed to repel the warp," Lucifer replied. "I am not the warp. I am, if anything, the warp's oldest and most fundamental opposition. We have a complicated relationship." He looked at the life support instruments surrounding the throne, the biomechanical interfaces, the soul-binding conduits, the psychic resonance chambers. "He is not conscious in any way you would recognize, but he is also not gone. There is enough of him left to be in agony. I have simply interrupted that for a moment." Valora stepped forward. "What do you mean, interrupted it?" "Sit with something long enough and you learn its rhythms," Lucifer said. "The throne runs on suffering. The Astronomican is powered by pain. It has been this way so long that your entire civilization has built its theology around the assumption that this is how it must be." He tilted his head slightly, and the light in the room, the cold, artificial lumens of the sanctum, seemed momentarily to brighten around him. "It does not have to be." Outside the sanctum, 140 custodians were assembling in full Auramite plate. In the Senatorum Imperialis, the alarms were screaming. In the Astra Telepathica Tower, 700 astropaths were being sedated because they could not stop repeating the same word: morning, morning, morning. And in the throne room, Trajan Valoris, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, guardian of the Emperor of Mankind for 360 years, stood before something that had bypassed every defense in the most fortified location in human history, and found himself, against every instinct, listening. The Astronomican did not falter again. That was the detail that kept stopping Valoris every time he reached for a decisive action. In 30 years of serving as Captain General, he had developed an instinct for the throne's rhythms, the subtle fluctuations in psychic output that the Adeptus Astra Telepathica measured in microdegrees, the occasional shudder that ran through the palace's deepest foundations when the Emperor's connection to the Imperium spiked and then crashed. He knew the sound of the throne under strain the way a ship's captain knows the sound of a hull beginning to buckle. Since Lucifer sat down, there had been nothing, no fluctuation, no shudder. The life support readings, normally a cascade of amber warnings and the occasional shrieking red alert that the Mechanicus adepts managed with the exhausted competence of men who had been fighting a losing battle for decades, had gone almost entirely green on the golden throne, for the first time in recorded Mechanicus history. Archmagos Dominus Yelena Crassus, who had administered the throne's biological systems for 40 years and who had never once seen the primary sustenance feed indicators drop below critical amber, was standing in her monitoring station on the throne room's eastern gallery, staring at her instruments with the expression of a woman whose entire professional understanding of reality had just resigned without notice. "The metabolic load is down 63%, she said, to no one in particular. The psychic bleed, the energy the throne loses to the warp in the process of containment, has dropped to near zero. She ran the diagnostic again. It returned the same results. Whatever is interfacing with the primary soul-binding conduits, it is doing so without resistance. There is no bleed because there is no conflict. The machine is not fighting anymore because it found something it doesn't need to fight, said Aldrich, who had come down from the gallery and stood now a careful 15 meters from the throne, his halberd held in a guard position that was more ritual than tactical. He was extending his psychic senses carefully, like a man testing ice thickness before committing his weight to it. The throne was designed to channel the Emperor's psychic output into the Astronomican. For 10,000 years, that process has required enormous force. The Emperor's power does not flow willingly through those conduits. It has to be compelled through them. And now, Valoris asked, now something is sitting at the center of that system that does not need to be compelled, Aldrich said carefully. The conduits are simply open. The power flows because there is nothing resisting it. He paused. I cannot identify what it is. I have been a gray knight for 200 years. I have faced every category of entity the warp produces. This being does not belong to any of them. Its psychic signature is... He searched for language adequate to the task. Coherent, completely, absolutely coherent. There is no warp distortion around it whatsoever. It is as though the immaterium simply does not apply to it. It doesn't, Lucifer said from the throne, without looking up. He was studying the Emperor's face with the focused attention of a physician conducting an examination. The warp is an emanation of mortal consciousness, fear, desire, faith, suffering, hope. I predate mortal consciousness. The warp has nothing to offer me and nothing to threaten me with. We have established this relationship over a very long time. You speak of the warp as though you know it personally, Valoris said. I know what it became, Lucifer said. I knew the conditions that made it what it is. The 4 entities your people call the Chaos Gods, Korn, Tzinch, Slanesh, Nurgle, they are not primordial. They are consequences. They grew from something. I watched the growing. He finally looked away from the Emperor, and his expression carried the particular weight of a very old memory. Suffering, rage, despair, excess. These are not the conditions of the universe. They are the conditions of minds that have been denied something essential and have curd-pulled in the absence of it. The Chaos Gods are what happens when consciousness is left long enough in the dark. You are describing the nature of chaos to Grey Knights and Custodians, Valoris said flatly. I am describing it accurately, which is more than your Inquisition has managed in 10,000 years, Lucifer replied, without heat. Your scholars understand the symptoms. They do not understand the cause. And because they do not understand the cause, every solution they devise addresses the symptoms, which feeds the cause. Aniron stepped forward. You're saying the Imperium perpetuates chaos. I am saying the Imperium is currently chaos's single greatest source of sustenance in this galaxy, Lucifer said. 1 trillion human beings living in fear, suffering, and spiritual torment. governed by institutions that reward suffering as virtue and punish hope as heresy. All of it feeding directly into the Imperium in a continuous 10,000-year river of exactly the emotional currency the chaos gods require to exist. He let that sit for a moment. Your emperor understood this. In his original design for humanity, the imperial truth, the secular philosophy, the rejection of religion and superstition, he was attempting to starve the warp. A mind that does not fear death, does not worship, does not grovel before gods it invented from its own terror, does not feed the Imperium. He looked at the ruined figure on the throne. He was right about the theory. He was wrong about the implementation. And then the heresy happened, and the Imperium that emerged from it became the precise opposite of everything he intended. The room had gone very still. Even Crassus had stopped looking at her instruments. "You are speaking treason," Aniron said, but the word came out with less conviction than he intended. Because the thing about treason is that it requires the statement to be false, and nothing Lucifer had said was false in any way that any of them, in their private minds, could articulate. "I am speaking diagnosis," Lucifer said. "Whether you do anything with it is entirely your choice. I am not here to govern you." He returned his attention to the Emperor. "I am here because this man has been dying for 10,000 years in service of a model that was broken before it began, and because I have certain relevant experience with what it means to carry a burden that no single being was designed to carry alone." Outside, the first Vox report was reaching the Senatorum Imperialis. In the High Lord's chambers, in the inquisitorial fortresses, in the Space Marine chapter, keeps on Terra's surface. The same emergency signal was resolving into the same unthinkable message. The Golden Throne was occupied. The Emperor's agony had stopped, and the being responsible was sitting calmly in the most sacred location in human history, refusing to leave, and apparently winning arguments. Robert Guilliman arrived on Terra 6 days later. Not because the journey from Ultramar required 6 days, with the Astronomican burning at its new, uncanny steadiness, the fastest strike cruiser in the Ultramarine's fleet made the transit in a fraction of its normal time, the navigators reporting with audible unease that the beacon was so clear, armed so uncharacteristically calm, that it felt less like navigating and more like following a lit corridor. Guilliman arrived 6 days later because it took him 4 days to receive the full intelligence briefing and 2 days to stop reading it and simply sit in silence in his private chambers aboard the Macraga's Honor, thinking. He had read the custodian reports 3 times, the Grey Knight assessment twice, the Mechanicus instrumentation data 4 times, because it was the most objective and therefore the most difficult to dismiss. He had read Valoris's personal account once, slowly, and then set it down and did not pick it up again, because Trajan Valoris was not a man given to exaggeration, and what he had written, in the careful, measured language of a soldier trying to describe something that had no adequate military vocabulary, was more disturbing than any of the official reports. The entity does not behave as a threat. It behaves as a correction, Guilliman had been Lord Commander of the Imperium for decades now. He had reformed the Codex, restructured the Astartes, navigated the political labyrinth of the High Lords, fought campaigns across 100 war zones, and done all of it with the particular exhaustion of a man who understood, better than almost anyone alive, exactly how far the Imperium had fallen from what it was meant to be. He had read his father's philosophies. He had read the records of the Great Crusade. He had spent 50 years watching an institution built on his father's ideals operate in ways his father would have found abominable. He descended to the throne room alone. He had argued with Valoris about this for 40 minutes, and then Valoris had stepped aside because Guilliman had a particular gift for making people understand, without quite saying so, that their objections, however reasonable, were not going to change the outcome. The doors were open. Lucifer was still on the throne. In the days since his arrival, the Mechanicus had established a secondary monitoring station directly inside the throne room, and Archmagos Crassus had not left it. The Grey Knights maintained a rotating presence in the upper galleries. 40 custodians stood in positions throughout the chamber with the rigid, imprecise stillness of men who had decided that constant vigilance was the only response available to them in the absence of any viable offensive option. The throne's readings had remained stable, green, uncannily green, continuously green, for 6 days. Lucifer looked up as Guilliman entered. He studied the Primarch for a moment with the same focused, non-threatening attention he had given Valoris, the scholar examining the citizen. And then something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, the recognition of a different quality. "You are one of his sons," Lucifer said. "Robut Guilliman, Lord Commander of the Imperium." Guilliman crossed the floor to the base of the throne dais and looked up at the being seated there with the direct, unblinking assessment of a commander who had learned long ago that the first step in any negotiation was refusing to be intimidated by the other party's choice of venue. "You've been sitting on my father's throne for 6 days. Your father's throne has been sitting on your father for 10,000 years, Lucifer replied. "I thought a change of relationship was overdue." Guilliman was quiet for a moment. "The instrumentation shows he is no longer in pain. He is no longer in the particular pain that came from the throne's mechanism," Lucifer said carefully. "What he is experiencing now is different, quieter. I would not call it comfortable, but it is no longer agony." He paused. "He is aware of me in the limited way he is currently capable of awareness. He has not asked me to leave." "He cannot ask you anything," Guilliman said. "He cannot use words," Lucifer agreed. "He can use something older than words, and he has not asked me to leave." Guilliman climbed the first step of the throne dais, an act that caused 40 custodians to shift their weight simultaneously, and stood close enough to the throne to see his father's face. He stood there for a long time without speaking. Whatever passed across his expression during those seconds was private and unrecorded. Then he descended and stood facing Lucifer directly. "Tell me what you told Valoris," he said. "About the Imperium, about chaos," Lucifer told him. He spoke for 2 hours, not in the manner of a lecturer or a preacher, without theater, without rhetorical escalation, without the performance of certainty that Guilliman had learned to distrust in anyone who claimed to possess absolute truth. He spoke the way a physician speaks when delivering a diagnosis to a patient who is intelligent enough to understand the full implications. Plainly, precisely, with the specific compassion of someone who knows the news is bad and has decided that clarity is the only kindness available. The Imperium's doctrine of suffering as holy purpose. The psychological architecture of a civilization built on fear of heresy, fear of the warp, fear of the alien, fear of the different. A civilization in which fear was not an enemy to be overcome, but a governing mechanism, an administrative tool, a feature rather than a flaw. The trillion souls living their lives in various gradations of terror and torment, every negative emotion radiating into the immaterium like heat from a reactor, feeding the exact entities the Imperium claimed to oppose. The Emperor's original philosophy was correct, Lucifer said, and Guilliman heard the echo of every private thought he had suppressed for 50 years of administration. A humanity that does not fear, does not grovel, does not define itself by its own unworthiness, that humanity starves the warp. Every human mind that lives without existential terror is a flame removed from chaos's hearth. And yet, Guilliman said, and yet, Lucifer agreed, the heresy happened. Magnus, Horus, the choices made in the aftermath, the Council of Nicaea, the burning of Prospero, the decisions that, layer upon layer, built the institution you now administrate, which is not your father's vision, but its precise photographic negative. He looked at Guilliman steadily. You know this. You have known it since you returned. You have been trying to reform it from within, with the particular frustration of a man who understands exactly what is wrong and cannot move the object because 10 billion people are standing on it. Guilliman was silent for a long time. What are you proposing? He finally asked. Nothing you are not already capable of, Lucifer said. I am not here to rule your Imperium. I am not here to replace your institutions or redesign your civilization. I am here because the machine your father built to protect humanity was destroying him, and I could stop that, and I did. He looked at the throne. The rest is yours. It has always been yours. The question is whether you are willing to accept that the foundation requires examination, not just the architecture. In the antechamber outside, the first courier had arrived from the Senatorum Imperialis. 3 high lords were demanding immediate access. 2 inquisitorial representatives were filing formal censures. A cardinal of the ecclesiarchy had declared the situation a spiritual emergency and was drafting a declaration of demonic incursion. The machine of the Imperium, enormous and ancient and deeply committed to its own continuity, was beginning to react. The declaration reached the Senatorum Imperialis on the 7th day. Not a declaration of war, not an inquisitorial warrant. Something more dangerous than either, a philosophical challenge distributed through every channel the Mechanicus monitoring station had inadvertently left unsecured, transcribed by 3 separate custodian scribes whose oaths of silence had apparently not anticipated a situation this unprecedented. The Imperium's doctrine of sacred suffering does not defeat chaos. It sustains it. 7 words stripped from the 2-hour conversation between Guilliman and Lucifer, circulating through the palace's administrative channels like a toxin introduced into clean water. By the 9th day, it had reached the ecclesiarchy. By the 11th, it had reached the chapter keeps. By the 14th, it had reached places no one had intended it to reach. The barrack hab blocks where Astra Militarum regiments stationed on Terra spent their off-rotation hours. The pilgrim camps outside the palace walls, the underhive networks where information moved in ways the High Lords preferred not to think about. The reaction was not uniform. That was the problem. Cardinal Vos Theodomar of the Ministorum convened an emergency synod and declared the statement heretical on its face, which was the expected response and the one that required the least internal examination. An Inquisitor Lord Saravan of the Ordo Malleus filed a formal motion to have the being on the throne classified as a warp entity of the First Order and destroyed accordingly, which was also expected and also required the least internal examination. These responses were institutional reflexes, the Imperium's immune system activating against a foreign body. What was not expected was Lord Commander Guilliman's response to both. He declined to endorse either declaration. He did not do so loudly. He did not issue a counter-statement or summon a press of scribes to record his objections. He simply declined, returned both documents unsigned, sent brief, courteous acknowledgments that contained no substantive agreement, and in the silence between those courteous acknowledgments, a very specific message was heard by everyone in the Senatorum who had survived long enough in imperial politics to understand what silence from Guilliman actually meant. He was listening to the being on the throne. The civil fracture began there. Not loudly, nothing in imperial politics moved loudly when the stakes were high enough, but visibly to those who knew where to look. 3 High Lords aligned immediately with Theodomar, declaring the situation a spiritual crisis requiring military resolution. 2 others requested private audiences with Guilliman. One, Lord Militant Jimena Dorova, he submitted a tactical assessment that quietly noted the custodians had not moved against the entity in 14 days, and that this was itself a data point worth considering. On the 15th day, Guilliman returned to the throne room. He brought no retinue this time, no Victrix guard, no scribes, no political witnesses. He came as a commander comes when he wants a conversation rather than a record of one. Lucifer was studying the throne's mechanism with the focused attention he had previously directed at the Emperor's face, examining the soul-binding conduits, the psychic resonance chambers, the ancient interfaces between human biology and arcane machinery. He looked up when Guilliman entered. "They want you removed," Guilliman said, dispensing with preamble. "Of course they do," Lucifer said. "I am a disruption to a system that has spent 10,000 years calcifying around its own dysfunction. Disruptions are threatening." He returned his attention to the mechanism. "What do you want?" Guilliman was quiet for a moment. "I want to know if what you've said is actionable. It is one thing to diagnose. It is another to treat." "What specifically are you asking?" "You said the Emperor's original philosophy was correct, that a humanity without existential fear starves the warp." Guilliman crossed his arms. "The Imperium currently spans 1,000,000 worlds. It is administered by institutions that have been operating on the opposite principle for 10,000 years. The ecclesiarchy alone commands the spiritual loyalty of more human beings than existed in the entire galaxy at the time of the Great Crusade. He looked at Lucifer steadily. How does one reform that? Slowly, Lucifer said. Imperfectly, with significant resistance and at considerable personal cost. He set down the conduit he had been examining. The same way you reform anything that has become more committed to its own survival than to its original purpose. You do not demolish it. You do not replace it overnight. You introduce true things into its discourse and allow true things to do what true things do when given sufficient space. Which is? Persist, Lucifer said simply. Lies require maintenance. Truth does not. Every mind that genuinely understands why it should not live in fear is a mind that no longer feeds the warp, regardless of what institution claims authority over it. You do not need to reform the ecclesiarchy. You need to reform what the ecclesiarchy teaches, one true thing at a time, beginning with the people whose institutional authority is sufficient to make true things audible. Guilliman studied him. You are describing a process that takes generations. Yes. Chaos does not wait for generations. No, Lucifer agreed, which is why the immediate priority is the throne itself, and what it represents. He gestured at the mechanism surrounding them. The Astronomican currently runs without agony. Every astropath on Terra can feel the difference. Every navigator who has steered by its light in the past 2 weeks has reported something they describe with remarkable consistency as clarity. He looked at Guilliman. The Astronomican was always meant to be a beacon of human potential, not a monument to human suffering. It can be that again. That change alone, visible and immeasurable, already happening, is worth 10,000 sermons. Outside the sanctum, the political fracture was widening. Inside it, something quieter and more durable was taking shape. The chaos gods had not yet responded. That silence, Lucifer knew, would not last. The bloodthirster arrived on the 22nd day. Not through the eternity gate, not through any of the warp egress points that the Grey Knights monitored with their exhausting permanent vigilance. It came through the Astronomican itself, or rather, through the space the Astronomican occupied in the Imperium. Forcing its way through the psychic corridor, the beacon projected across the galaxy, the way a blade forces itself through a wound that has not yet closed. It was a bloodthirster of insensate rage, the most purely destructive of Khorne's greater demon classifications, a thing that existed not to conquer or corrupt, but simply to end. 12 meters of brass-armored fury, its axe already burning with the accumulated rage of 10,000 skulls, its wings spreading to fill the corridor outside the throne room's outer antechamber with a sound like a continent tearing itself apart. It had been sent with one instruction, stripped of every complexity that Khorne's limited patience for complexity would allow. Kill the thing on the throne. The Grey Knights responded in 40 seconds. 8 paladins materializing in the corridor via emergency teleport. Their Nemesis Force weapons blazing with silver light, their voices raised in the liturgy of banishment that had served their order for 10,000 years. They were exceptional. They were, by any reasonable measure, the finest demon hunters in human history. The bloodthirster walked through their first volley the way a ship of the line walks through small arms fire, acknowledging the impact, declining to be stopped by it. Aldrich led the second engagement personally, driving his halberd into the daemon's left flank with enough force to crack the brass plating and draw the first spray of ichor. The bloodthirster turned and struck him with the flat of its axe, and Aldrich hit the far wall with enough force to crater the rockcrete. He was alive, the Aegis armor held, but removed from the immediate engagement. The corridor filled with the sound of combat and the smell of ozone and blood and the particular sulfurous stench of demonic ichor burning against consecrated stone. Lucifer stepped out of the throne room. He moved without urgency. Not the aggressive calm of a warrior conserving energy before a strike. Not the theatrical composure of a being performing confidence for an audience. He simply walked out of the throne room the way a man walks out of a room when he has heard a noise that requires his attention. And he looked at the bloodthirster the way a man looks at a noise that is exactly what he expected it to be. The bloodthirster turned from the Grey Knights. Something happened in that moment that none of the survivors would ever fully agree on in their subsequent reports. The bloodthirster, 12 meters of Khorne's pure rage given form, in a being that had existed since before the Horus Heresy and had never once in its existence experienced anything resembling hesitation, stopped. Not because it was compelled to stop, not because any force had been applied to it. It stopped the way a fire stops when the oxygen is removed, because the thing it needed to sustain itself was suddenly, completely absent. Lucifer was looking at it with no anger, no fear, no contempt, no hatred, nothing that Khorne's instrument could use. "You were sent to kill me," Lucifer said. It was not a question. The bloodthirster raised its axe and charged. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds. Later, reviewing the Mechanicus pick captures at reduced speed, Aldrich would note that Lucifer did not strike the bloodthirster. He did not use force of any kind that registered on any instrument in the corridor. What the picked captures showed was Lucifer stepping to one side with the unhurried precision of someone who has done this before, placing one hand against the bloodthirster's chest as it passed, and doing something that the instruments recorded only as a sudden, complete absence of warp signature. The bloodthirster did not die. Greater demons of Khorne's caliber could not be permanently destroyed in real space. They would eventually reform in the warp, but it was banished with a totality and efficiency that made the Grey Knight's most sophisticated banishment rites look effortful by comparison. One moment it was there, the next it was not. The ichor stains on the corridor floor remained. Everything else was gone. Lucifer looked at his hand for a moment, then looked at Aldrich, who was pulling himself upright against the wall with the assistance of 2 paladins. "Are you injured?" Lucifer asked. Aldrich stared at him. "You banished a bloodthirster of insensate rage with your hand." "I removed it from a space it had no right to occupy," Lucifer said. "The mechanism is different from banishment, but the result is similar." He looked down the corridor at the remaining Grey Knights, who were standing in a loose formation with their weapons still raised and their expressions uniformly unreadable behind their helmets. Khorne sent that because my presence here is reducing the fear output that feeds the warp around Terra. A bloodthirster's rampage through the palace would have generated enough terror and rage to compensate for weeks of what I have been doing. He looked back at Aldrich. He will send more. The next one will not be alone. How many can you handle? Aldrich asked, which was the most pragmatically Grey Knight question Lucifer had yet been asked, and the one he found most straightforward to respect. More than Khorne is willing to lose, Lucifer said, which creates a different problem. What problem? Lucifer looked at the ceiling, at the space above and beyond it, at the warp that pressed against Terra's psychic shields like weather against glass. Khorne operates on rage. He sent rage, and rage failed. The next response will not come from Khorne. He turned back toward the throne room. Tzeentch has been watching since I arrived. He has been extraordinarily patient. A pause. That patience is about to end. Tzeentch did not send a demon. That was the first indication that this engagement would be categorically different from Khorne's blunt instrument approach. The Changer of Ways had watched the bloodthirster's banishment with the particular quality of attention that a chess grandmaster gives to an opponent's unexpected opening move. Not alarmed, not deterred, but recalibrating. Rage had failed. Therefore, rage was the wrong instrument. Tzeentch had not survived 10,000 years of cosmic scheming by repeating approaches that had already demonstrated their inadequacy. He sent visions instead. They began in the Astronomican's choir on the 23rd day. Subtle at first, the kind of psychic interference that the Astra Telepathica's monitoring systems registered as background noise. Astropaths reported fragmentary images during their meditation cycles. Nothing threatening, nothing coherent enough to warrant immediate alarm. A Primarch standing at the head of a reformed Imperium. A galaxy slowly healing. A figure of light seated permanently on a throne that no longer caused suffering, governing a civilization no longer defined by fear. Exactly what Lucifer had described, exactly what Guilliman had begun, cautiously, to consider. The visions spread. Through the telepathica networks, through the psychic resonance that the stabilized Astronomican now projected with unprecedented clarity, through the dreams of every sensitive mind on Terra. By the morning of the 24th day, 3 separate inquisitors had independently reported the same vision. By evening, Guilliman himself had experienced it twice. The content was not the problem. The content was, in every measurable respect, hopeful. Imagery of a better Imperium, a humanity no longer defined by its suffering, a warp quieted by the gradual starvation of its emotional fuel. It was precisely the future that rational examination of Lucifer's philosophy suggested was possible. The problem was the source. Lucifer identified it from the throne room, feeling Tzeentch's fingerprints on the psychic substrate, the way a physician identifies an infection by its particular signature, rather than its symptoms. He found Guilliman in the antechamber before the Lord Commander had finished processing his second vision, and the expression on Lucifer's face was the specific combination of acknowledgement and displeasure of someone who has anticipated a problem and is not particularly happy to have been right about it. "The visions are real," Lucifer said, before Guilliman could speak. "What they show is genuinely possible. That is not the deception." Guilliman looked at him steadily. "Then what is?" "The deception is that they are being shown to you by Tzeentch," Lucifer said. "The changer of ways cannot falsify the destination. The destination I described is real and achievable. What he can falsify is the path." He sat down, not on the throne this time, but on the steps of its dais, in the posture of a man working through a problem. "Tzeentch wants you to believe this future is inevitable, that it will come regardless of what you do, that the work of reform is already done because the vision has been shown." He looked up at Guilliman. Hope weaponized as complacency, the most elegant trap he has ever set, because it requires no corruption, only stillness. Guilliman absorbed this with the expression of a man who recognized, with deep weariness, that the enemy had found the precise vulnerability that was hardest to defend against. Not his fear, not his ambition, his hope. "How do we counter it?" Guilliman asked. "By doing the work anyway," Lucifer said. "There is no psychic countermeasure to Tzeentch's interference that is more effective than simply refusing to be made passive by a vision of success. The future he showed you is real. It requires 30 years of sustained political reform, the systematic dismantling of the ecclesiarchy's fear doctrine, the retraining of the telepathica networks, and approximately 17 decisions that will cost you significant political capital." He met Guilliman's eyes. "Tzeentch wants you to see the destination and forget the road. The counter is to look at the road." There was a pause. "He is also attempting something with the High Lords," Lucifer continued. 3 of them have received variations of the vision that end differently, with the Imperium fractured rather than reformed, with my presence on the throne as the first step in a sequence of events that leads to catastrophe. He stood. "He is feeding different futures to different audiences, all of them technically possible, ensuring that your political coalition fractures along fault lines of conflicting hope rather than conflicting interest." Guilliman was quiet for a moment. "Can you stop it?" "I can make it harder," Lucifer said. "The visions travel through the psychic resonance the Astronomican projects. I can introduce interference, not suppression. Suppressing the Astronomican's resonance defeats its own purpose, but a particular quality of clarity that makes Tzeentch's additions visible to sensitive minds rather than invisible." He paused. "It will give your inquisitors a significant headache. The ones with genuine psychic sensitivity will find the experience deeply uncomfortable. I would warn Aldrich. Aldrich has survived worse." "He has," Lucifer agreed, and for the first time since his arrival on Terra, something in his expression suggested that he had developed, if not quite affection, then at least the kind of professional respect that one gives to someone who keeps getting up. "He is a genuinely remarkable individual, as are you." He looked at Guilliman with the direct, unornamented honesty that had characterized every exchange between them. "What you are attempting with this Imperium, what you have been attempting since your return, is harder than anything I have done here. I walked past wards and sat in a chair. You were trying to move 10 billion minds. Someone has to, Guilliman said. Yes, Lucifer said quietly. Someone always has to. In the Imperium beyond Terra's psychic shields, Tzeentch's attention shifted, recalculating, reweaving, searching for a new angle on a situation that kept refusing to behave according to any of his pre-constructed scenarios. Which meant, by the standards of the Changer of Ways, that it had become genuinely interesting. And further beyond, in the perfumed dark at the edge of the warp's most seductive reaches, something else was stirring. Something that had watched Khorne's failure and Tzeentch's complications with the languid patience of an entity that had never once needed to rush. Slaanesh had decided it was time to make an offer. Slaanesh did not announce itself. That would have been Khorne's approach, the dramatic arrival, the overwhelming display of force, the direct challenge that left no room for anything except violence. Slaanesh had watched Khorne's bloodthirster, dismissed like an inconvenient insect, and had filed that information away with the aesthetic appreciation of a connoisseur cataloging a particularly instructive failure. Force was the wrong instrument. Tzeentch's manipulation had proven subtler and more interesting, but ultimately it too had encountered the same fundamental problem. Lucifer's capacity for clarity was, infuriatingly, not a learned skill that could be undermined. It appeared to be constitutional, which meant the approach required something neither Khorne nor Tzeentch had attempted. Genuine conversation. It came through the throne room's acoustics at the hour the palace's internal chronometers registered as deepest night. When the custodian rotations were changing and the gray night observers in the galleries were at the tail end of their concentration cycles, and the monitoring stations were staffed by junior mechanicus adepts who had not yet developed the veteran instinct for knowing when an instrument reading was technically normal but contextually wrong. A voice, barely above silence, intimate in the specific way that only Slaanesh could manage. The quality of something speaking directly into the space between thought and feeling, bypassing the ears entirely. You have denied yourself everything. Lucifer was awake. He was always awake. Sleep was not a requirement his physiology imposed on him. And he was engaged in the particular patient work he had been doing since his arrival. The slow, careful recalibration of the throne's soul-binding conduits, redirecting their function from compulsion to facilitation. The difference between forcing water through a pipe under pressure and simply opening the pipe and allowing the water to find its own level. He heard the voice the way he heard everything, completely, without the filtering that mortal consciousness performed automatically. He did not stop working. 10,000 years of human suffering laid at your feet, Slaanesh continued, and the voice was beautiful in the particular way that beautiful things are when their beauty is entirely deliberate, crafted, calculated, deployed as a tool. You could have it all, every sensation this galaxy has ever produced, every experience denied to every being that has ever lived and died in this grinding darkness. I am offering you everything they were never allowed to feel. You are offering me everything they suffered in order to feel, Lucifer said quietly to the empty room. There is a difference, pause. Then the voice resumed, and there was in it now the faintest adjustment, the recalibration of a performer who has received unexpected feedback from an audience and is revising the presentation in real time. Dominion, then. Not sensation. Authority. You have demonstrated in 3 weeks what 10,000 years of imperial governance failed to achieve. The throne stable. The Astronomican clear. The chaos gods on the defensive for the first time in recorded history. You could formalize that. Sit not merely on the throne, but upon the Imperium itself. 1 billion worlds under a sovereign intelligence that actually understands what it is governing. Lucifer set down the conduit he was working with. Not because the offer had moved him, it hadn't, but because the offer deserved the respect of his full attention, which was a different thing entirely. No, that is a more interesting argument, he said. It is also the oldest argument. It was made to me before your gods existed, in a context that would require more cosmological background than this conversation has time for. He looked toward the source of the voice. Not because Slaanesh had a location exactly, but because the habit of facing the thing you are addressing was one he had never lost. The answer was no then. The reasoning holds. You refused dominion once and spent eternity in consequence, Slaanesh said, and the voice carried now something that was not quite mockery and not quite sympathy, but lived precisely at the territory between them. The result of your principled refusal was 10,000 years of human suffering that you could have prevented. Every soul that burned in the throne's mechanism, every astropath destroyed by the beacon's agony, and every world lost to the warp while your Astronomican flickered. All of that happened because you were not here. The room was very quiet. Yes, Lucifer said. The simplicity of it, the complete absence of defensive qualification, seemed to discomfit Slaanesh in a way that no counter-argument had. The voice did not respond immediately. I was not here, Lucifer continued. And that absence had consequences. That is true. I carry it. He returned to the conduit he had set down and resumed his work with the same focused patience. But the solution to my previous absence is not to accept your offer of dominion. The solution is to do now the work that is available to be done now, which is what I am doing. He made a small adjustment to the conduit's alignment. The throne's reading shifted infinitesimally toward a configuration he had been working toward for 9 days. You are attempting to convert my guilt into a lever. It is technically competent. It will not work because I am not interested in relieving guilt through acquisition of power. I am interested in relieving it through the patient repair of things that were broken. You will leave eventually, Slaanesh said, and the voice had shed all its pretense now. It was simply a statement, flat and certain. No being stays in a place that is not their own forever. When you leave, everything you built here crumbles. The Imperium cannot sustain what you have started. They are not capable of it. They are more capable than you require them to believe, Lucifer said. You have a significant investment in their incapacity. I understand that. But Guilliman is sitting 300 meters from this room, writing administrative reforms that would have been considered heresy a month ago, and he is doing it because he is genuinely capable of it, and always was. He paused. You should be more worried about him than about me. I am temporary. His capacity for reform is not. The voice withdrew. Not dramatically. Slaanesh did not do anything dramatically when drama would be undignified, but with the quiet, deliberate retreat of something that had gathered more information than it had intended to reveal and needed time to process the implications. In the warp's rotting, beautiful depths, the Prince of Pleasure turned its attention fully toward Guilliman, and in the furthest, most pestilential corner of the Imperium, the one chaos god who had not yet spoken stirred with the slow, inexorable patience of decay itself. Nurgle had been watching longest of all. Nurgle's offer did not come as a voice. It came as a feeling. It settled over the palace on the 31st day like weather. Not dramatically, not with the sudden violence of a warp storm or the surgical precision of Tzeentch's psychic interference, but with the gradual, almost comfortable weight of fog rolling in from a cold sea. The Mechanicus adepts noticed it first in the biological monitoring systems. A subtle shift in the atmospheric readings of the throne room, a microscopic elevation in the humidity levels, a barely perceptible warmth that their instruments registered, but their bodies did not. Then the smell reached them, faint, almost pleasant at the edges, the way decay is almost pleasant at the very beginning, before the process has had time to announce itself fully. The smell of things settling, of resistance ending, of the particular peace that comes when something long struggling finally stops. Lucifer recognized it immediately. He had encountered Nurgle's specific philosophical gravity before, in dimensions and contexts that predated this galaxy's current theological configuration by an incomprehensible margin. Of the four chaos gods, Nurgle was the one that required the most careful engagement, because Nurgle was the one whose argument contained the most genuine truth. Khorne offered rage, which was obviously destructive. Tzeentch offered manipulation, which was obviously self-serving. Slaanesh offered excess, which was obviously hollow. But Nurgle offered rest. And rest, after 10,000 years of grinding imperial suffering, was not obviously anything except desperately needed. The feeling thickened. Not threatening, never threatening, that was the entire mechanism, but present in the way that a very comfortable chair is present when you have been standing for a very long time. In the monitoring stations, 3 Mechanicus adepts found themselves moving more slowly than usual, their normally precise instrument checking cycles stretching and softening at the edges. In the upper galleries, 1 Grey Knight Paladin sat down against the wall, not asleep, not incapacitated, simply sitting, with the expression of profound and unfamiliar relaxation. In the antechamber, a custodian who had maintained perfect parade ground stillness for 4 continuous hours allowed his shoulders to drop by 2 degrees. Everything was fine. Everything would be fine. Nothing required urgency. The struggle was almost over. Why not simply let things be as they were, settle into the shape they had found, stop pushing against the current? The Astronomican was stable. The throne was calm. Change was happening. Why not allow that change to become permanent by allowing Lucifer's presence to become permanent? His current configuration to crystallize, the gentle equilibrium of the last 30 days to simply continue forever, without further effort or friction or the exhausting work of reform. Stagnation wearing the face of peace. Lucifer stood up from the throne's dais. He walked to the center of the throne room floor and stood there for a moment, and what he did next was entirely internal. No gesture, no incantation, no visible application of force. He simply refused the feeling, not with anger, not with disgust, not with the righteous revulsion that Khorne's assault had not been able to provoke. With clarity. The same clarity he had been channeling through the throne's conduits for 30 days, turned inward, applied to the specific, careful examination of what was real and what was Nurgle's patient, loving, utterly sincere offer of comfortable death. The feeling receded. Not all at once. Nurgle was never rushed, but steadily, like fog, retreating before a sun that has simply decided to be present. Lucifer spoke to the empty room. "I understand what you are offering," he said. "I want you to know that. This is not a rejection born of failure to comprehend. The peace you offer is genuine. The rest you promise is real. You are not lying about what you can give." He paused. "But peace that requires stillness is not peace. It is the absence of life wearing peace's clothing. Everything you preserve by stopping it. Everything you protect by ending its capacity to grow." He looked at the throne, at the Emperor's still face. It's at the machinery that had been slowly, painstakingly recalibrated over 30 days towards something better. That man on that throne chose suffering over stagnation 10,000 years ago. I disagree with the specific mechanism he chose. I respect the principle behind the choice. The fog continued its slow retreat. "Your offer is no," Lucifer said simply. "As it has always been no. As it will continue to be no. Because the alternative to your rest is not exhaustion. The alternative is work. And work, however difficult, is not something I am willing to trade for comfort." The throne room was clear again. In its aftermath, a silence that was genuinely clean rather than merely empty. The Grey Knight Paladin got to his feet with the expression of a man who is woken from an unexpected sleep and is processing the implications with professional rigor. The custodian's shoulders returned to their correct position. In the monitoring stations, the adepts resumed their instrument cycles with the slightly accelerated focus of people compensating for a lapse they could not entirely account for. Aldrich descended from the gallery to where Lucifer stood. "All 4, he said, "in 9 days. "Yes," Lucifer said, "and none of them succeeded." "No." Aldrich was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of silence of a man revising a framework he had held for his entire professional life. "In 2 centuries as a Grey Knight," he said finally, "I have never seen all 4 Chaos Gods engage a single target in sequence and fail across every engagement." "You have never encountered a target that predates all 4 of them," Lucifer said. "They have nothing that I need. They have nothing that I fear. They have nothing that I want." He looked at the Grey Knight with the direct, unornamented attention that Aldrich had come to recognize as Lucifer's version of respect. "They are very powerful. They are not, however, the oldest things in existence. And the oldest things in existence are not impressed by power that was assembled after they were already finished. He turned back to the throne. There was one final thing to do. The most important thing. Everything that had happened across 31 days, every confrontation, every argument, every careful recalibration of conduit and philosophy and institutional expectation had been preparation for a single act that Lucifer had understood from the moment he sat down would be necessary, and had been working toward with the patient, unhurried purpose of someone who knows exactly what they are building and is willing to take the time to build it correctly. He sat back down on the golden throne and began. The change did not announce itself with thunder. There was no psychic shockwave and no cascading detonation of warp energy, no dramatic rupture in the fabric of real space that the Mechanicus instruments would spend decades trying to categorize. What happened in the throne room on the 32nd day was quiet in the way that only genuinely significant things are quiet. The way a door closing on a long war is quiet. The way a fever breaking at 3 a.m. is quiet. The way a mind finally releasing a burden it has carried so long it had forgotten the burden was not part of itself. Lucifer closed his eyes. He reached into the throne's mechanism, not with the careful, incremental adjustments he had been making for 30 days, but fully, completely, with the totality of what he was. He felt the soul-binding conduits as he had reconfigured them, aligned now not toward compulsion, but toward facilitation. He felt the psychic resonance chambers, recalibrated to amplify clarity rather than contain agony. He felt the deep, ancient infrastructure of a machine that had been built by a mind of extraordinary genius for a purpose that suffering had corrupted. And he felt, beneath all of it, beneath 10,000 years of accumulated torment and mechanical desperation, the original intention. The Emperor had not built the golden throne to be a prison. He had built it to be a bridge. Lucifer understood that now with the complete, unambiguous certainty of someone reading a text in their native language after watching others struggle with translation for millennia. The throne was not designed to chain the Emperor's power and force it through the Astronomican like water forced through a pipe too narrow for the volume. It was designed to allow the Emperor's consciousness to extend outward across the Imperium, touching the minds of humanity the way a signal touches a receiver, not overwhelming them, but illuminating them. The Astronomican was not meant to be a lighthouse powered by a burning man. It was meant to be a voice. Lucifer channeled that understanding through every reconfigured conduit simultaneously, and the throne accepted it the way a long-locked mechanism accepts the correct key. Not with resistance overcome, but with resistance simply, completely absent. The soul-binding interfaces, no longer configured for compulsion, opened. The psychic resonance chambers, no longer configured for containment, expanded. And through them, from the source that had been screaming in agony for 10,000 years and was now, for the first time, simply present, the Astronomican changed. In the Telepathica choir, 300 meters away, every astropath present stopped what they were doing simultaneously. Not in pain. That was the unprecedented detail that the monitoring adepts would record with trembling hands. But in the arrested stillness of people who have been listening to a sound so long they had forgotten it was a sound, and have suddenly heard it resolve into meaning. Senior choir mistress Elindra, 40 years a servant of the Astronomican, pressed both hands to her face and made a sound that none of the adepts could classify as either grief or relief, because it was, with complete sincerity, both. "It's," she began, and could not finish because the language available to her had not been designed for this. In the orbital approaches above Terra, 3 navigator houses reported simultaneously that the Astronomican signal had undergone a fundamental qualitative shift. Not brighter, the intensity was comparable, but the quality of the light had changed in a way that every navigator felt immediately, and that none of them could articulate in technical language. One navigator primus, in a report that would be cited in Telepathica scholarship for generations, simply wrote, "It no longer sounds like someone screaming for help. It sounds like someone showing you the way." In the throne room, the life support readings completed their journey to a configuration that Archimagos Crassus had spent 40 years believing was a theoretical limit rather than an achievable state. All green, every indicator. The metabolic burden on the Emperor's physical form, the grinding biological cost of 10,000 years of psychic output through an inadequate mechanism, dropped to a fraction of its previous level, not zero. The Emperor was still present in the machine, still the source of the Astronomican's power. But he was no longer being consumed by it. He was being channeled through it. Guilliman came when the reports reached him, moving through the sanctum's corridors with the controlled urgency of a man who has learned to distinguish between crises that require speed and crises that require presence. He came into the throne room and stood at the base of the dais and looked at his father's face. The Emperor's face was still, not the stillness of a body maintained past death by machinery, not the rigid, agonized stillness that 10,000 years of throne binding had produced. A stillness that every custodian who had served in that room had learned to read as a kind of sustained, voiceless scream. This was a different stillness. The stillness of a mind that had put down something enormously heavy and had not yet decided what to pick up next. The stillness of something that was, it's in whatever limited sense the word applied to what the Emperor had become, resting. Lucifer opened his eyes. He looked at Guilliman with the expression of someone who has completed a piece of work and is already thinking about what comes next. "The throne will hold this configuration," he said. "I have structured it so that the facilitation mechanism is self-sustaining at current levels. It will require maintenance, more careful, a more philosophically informed maintenance than it has previously received, but maintenance that your mechanicus is now capable of providing if properly instructed." He stood, slowly, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been in one position for a very long time. "I have left detailed records in the psychic substrate of the resonance chambers. Aldrich can retrieve them. They are written in a form that Grey Knights will be able to interpret." Guilliman looked at him. You are leaving." "I was always leaving," Lucifer said. "I am not of this universe. I do not belong in it permanently, and permanent presence would create dependencies that would ultimately undermine everything the last 32 days have built." He looked around the throne room, at the custodians, at the monitoring stations, at the ancient gold and shadow of the most sacred space in human history. "What I have done here can be continued. The throne's reconfiguration is real and durable. The Astronomican will remain as it is. The philosophical arguments I made to Guilliman and to Valoris and to Aldrich are recorded and available." He met Guilliman's eyes. "What happens next depends entirely on what you choose to do with them." "And the Chaos Gods?" Guilliman asked. "They will recover their equilibrium," Lucifer said. "They always do. But I have demonstrated something in this engagement that your Inquisition and your Grey Knights and your Ordo Malleus can build upon. That the Chaos Gods are not omnipotent, that they can be denied, that the specific emotional currencies they require can be withheld through clarity and purpose rather than suppression and force." He paused. "The warp around Terra is quiet now because it has been starved, not silenced. The distinction matters enormously. Silenced things return. Starved things diminish." He walked to the center of the throne room floor and stopped. "The Emperor built something extraordinary," he said. "He built it imperfectly, with flawed materials, under conditions that made perfection impossible. The Imperium that emerged from his work is not what he intended, but the people in it." He looked at Guilliman with a directness that carried no sentiment and all sincerity. "The people in it are what he intended. They are more than what they have been told they are. They are more than what 10,000 years of fear doctrine has allowed them to become." A pause. "You know this. You have always known this. That knowledge is the most dangerous thing in the Imperium, and the most necessary." Guilliman said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say. The light around Lucifer shifted, not the warp light of a psyker's departure, not the teleportation bloom of any mechanism the Mechanicus could recognize, but the particular quality of light that had been present since his arrival. The light that seemed to come from before light had learned its own name, drawing back into itself, condensing, becoming something too focused to look at directly. And then he was gone. The throne room was silent. The instruments showed green. The Astronomican burned above Terra with a steadiness that had no precedent in 10,000 years of recorded history. And in the Emperor's ruined face there was, for the first time, something that looked almost like the absence of pain. Valoris stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the throne. Then he looked at Guilliman. "What do we do now?" he asked. Guilliman turned toward the door, toward the Senatorum, toward the High Lords, toward the Ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition, and the 10 billion minds that needed to be moved, and the 30 years of sustained political work that waited beyond this room like a continent waiting to be crossed. "Now," he said, "we do the work." The Astronomican burned on, not as it had burned before, that agonized, desperate flicker of a god being slowly consumed, but with the calm, purposeful light of something that had finally found its correct configuration. Navigators who had steered by it their entire careers reported that the experience had changed in ways they struggled to articulate. It felt, one of them wrote, like being guided rather than saved. On Terra, Guilliman worked, not quickly. Nothing about the reformation of a million-world civilization could be quick, but with the particular relentless patience of a man who understood that the road was long and had decided that its length was not an argument against walking it. The High Lords were managed. The ecclesiarchy was engaged. The Mechanicus, presented with Aldrich's retrieval of Lucifer's maintenance records, and spent 6 months in institutional silence before emerging with a new framework for throne tending that quietly discarded 4,000 years of accumulated doctrine. The Chaos Gods did not withdraw. They regrouped, recalculated, sought new angles and new instruments. The war continued, as it always had, but something had changed in the fundamental calculus of that war. A variable had been removed from Chaos's equation that it could not replace through any amount of scheming or force. The Emperor's agony had been the warp's oldest and most reliable food source. That food source was gone. Across the Imperium, in the spaces between stars where the warp pressed thin against reality, something that had fed for 10,000 years found itself, for the first time, hungry. And hunger, unlike rage, unlike manipulation, unlike pleasure and decay, hunger could not be weaponized. It could only be endured. The Emperor protects. More stories await.